President Donald Trump plans to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico on April 2nd in a move that threatens to spark a trade war. Goods from Canada and Mexico will be slapped with a 25% charge. Now, Canada has announced tariffs in response, but one question remains. What industries will be impacted the most? Canadian oil and gas producers and manufacturers of primary metals, plastics, and motor vehicles are among the top industries most exposed to potential U.S. tariffs. If sweeping tariffs are implemented, it could create significant challenges to communities in Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and New Brunswick. I'm now joined by Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited, to discuss what industries will be hit the hardest by Trump's tariffs. Brendan, thank you for joining me today.
Well, Theresa, let's do this thing. It's a trade war, as they've said, is actual war by other means. And while we're not quite at that point yet here in Canada, we're still a little bit bemused by it. I think it's getting serious.
Now, how might the recently imposed U.S. tariffs affect Canada's energy exports and the oil industry?
Well, making the price of anything more expensive does or should reduce demand for it. I think the bigger thing, though, is that with inflation being such a big concern, both here and south of the border, apparently in the U.S. they've got some situation with eggs. They really should have an egg marketing board. But with energy being such a big component of everything that is done in the economy, I think an even greater upward pressure on inflation by raising the price of energy through, call it tariffs, but it's taxes by another name, will have not only impact on the energy industry, but on the economy as a whole. Now, the flip side might be, having persecuted the energy industry for the last 10 years, it might be that the government of the day now wraps itself in the Canadian flag and says, no, what we meant was, and makes the domestic pressures on the energy industry a little bit less by doing things like making it easier to drill, explore, and to get our energy, our natural gas and oil, but particularly natural gas, to blue water. We need more pipelines. We need more capacity to sell our natural gas to the markets that really, really need it, like Europe, but particularly Asia, where they'll pay multiples of what we get from the US for the same commodity. So I do think that it can mean that Canada becomes more in control of its own destiny as an energy exporter, the way other exporting energy countries have done.
And considering the integrated nature of the North American automotive industry, what disruptions could arise from these tariffs and how might they affect Canadian auto parts manufacturers?
The disruptions are already happening, because whether or not the tariffs go through, and I actually thought they were starting in March. I know your intro, they said April, but the fact that I'm confused probably means everybody else is confused too. And that's the point. I think that's actually the intention of what's being done. You may say Trump is this or Trump is that, insane or what have you else, but the chaos that is being created is straight out of Game of Thrones. Chaos is a ladder. And I think the intent is to keep everybody guessing as to what his true motivations are. But the effect from the auto business and every other manufacturing business, I have a very good friend who's an engineer that makes switches. He is Canada and US operations. And the production has been very much moved forward in these parts, just in event that the Trump tariffs are introduced. So already you're getting forward demand. So the Canadian economy has actually been boosted these last few months in anticipation of the tariffs. So whether they go through or not, it doesn't matter, because everybody's already pre-ordered what they needed and pre-delivered what they needed. So there's likely to be a slump in the second and third quarters, irregardless of whether the tariffs go through or not.
Now, last night, Mark Carney won the Liberal leadership race. And on the topic of the economy, do you think that Mark Carney is the right person to be dealing with Donald Trump?
Well, only time will tell. What did he get? Like 86% of the vote? I think Kim Jong-il doesn't get that high a percentage. So we'll see what comes of it. When everybody agrees on something, it is often problematic. He is a bright feller, but his manifesto, his Das Kapital values wasn't exactly favorable to be seen. He's smartly a smart man with accomplishments in the central bank, but being a central banker and being an actual politician where you actually have to be conscious of the will of the people, at least to some extent, they're two very different jobs. And dealing with central bankers and dealing with personalities like the President of the United States, look, the Canadian Prime Minister has one freaking job to get along with the President of the US. Brian Mulroney understood that well, and we've benefited for 30 or 40 years as a result of that. The Prime Minister of the moment, Mr. Trudeau, he didn't think that was important, and here's where we are with these tariffs. If he and Trump had got along during Mr. Trump's first presidency, I think we'd be in a very different spot today. So you can talk tough, but ultimately, with any enemy, you eventually have to sit down and do a deal. And I think that's more the case than most with Canada and the US right now.
Now, we do just have about a minute left, but Ontario Premier Doug Ford has proposed a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US, and those will be in retaliation to the tariffs. He actually made that announcement today. Now, what impact will this have on Canada's economy and US-Canada trade relations?
Well, if we actually did what the Americans or Mr. Trump's proposing to do, and that is use tariffs to balance the budget or use tariffs to reduce income tax, then maybe. But it'll be interesting to see if the president's going to put a 10% tariff on US energy, and then the Ontario Premier says, that's not nearly enough. We need to tack another 25% on top of it. It's better than cutting off supplies altogether, because I think that'd be a pretty quick way to have US Marines at the Darlington nuclear power plant to secure America's energy supply. But I think premiers negotiating with presidents, that's the position that Trump was looking for, and belittling our prime minister by calling him a governor. I think that's it is a not an equal fight, and I think it may be done for grandstanding rather than commercial or even good political reasons. So
Brendan,
the
sorry, I do
results
have to
remain to be
interrupt
seen.
you. That's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much.